There is a particular kind of silence that follows a public accusation. Not the silence of a room that has nothing to say, but the silence of a room that is waiting, breath held, fork suspended, to see what the accused person does next. I know that silence well. I have been accused in rooms like this before. Smaller rooms mostly. Kitchen tables. Sunday dinners. The occasional phone call where my mother's voice carried the specific weight of managed disappointment, the kind that says, I am not angry, I am simply noting for the record that you have failed us again. But this room, the Castellano family reunion held every 2 years at my Uncle Ray's property in the hill country outside San Antonio. This room was the largest version of that silence I had ever stood inside. 61 relatives. 4 long tables under string lights. A catered spread that my Aunt Donna had organized and my Uncle Ray had paid for and about which everyone had already complimented everyone else twice. My mother stood at the end of the center table. She had not planned to make a speech. I could tell because she was holding a paper plate instead of a glass, which meant she had been in the middle of something when the feeling overtook her. Your cousins give their parents everything, she said, loudly enough that the nearest 2 tables went quiet. Then the next ones. The way silence spreads at these gatherings is genuinely impressive. It moves outward like something dropped into water. Marisol sends money every month. Danny bought his mother a car. Your cousin Elena paid off her parents' house. She looked at me. You think only of yourself. Uncle Ray nodded. He is my father's older brother and he has been nodding at my mother's assessments of me since I was 19 years old. It costs him nothing and earns him goodwill he spends elsewhere. Aunt Donna smirked. She is not a cruel woman, I want to be precise about this, but she has a specific relationship with my mother's grievances that functions like entertainment. Someone else's family drama is the negative space that makes your own family look like a success. My father said nothing. He was sitting 4 seats down from my mother, and he was looking at his plate, and that particular posture, the careful management of his own gaze, told me everything I needed to know about how long this had been building. I am 33 years old. My name is Isabel Reyes. I have been living in Austin for 9 years, working in financial forensics and private compliance consulting, and for 7 of those 9 years I have been transferring money into my parents' accounts with the quiet, systematic regularity of someone who has decided that love in this family is expressed through wire transfers and silence. I smiled. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I've been asked to share something, I said. This was not entirely true. I had asked myself to share something. But saying I've been asked buys you a half second of credibility in a room like this, and a half second is enough to get to the next sentence. Give me just a moment, I said. I had prepared for this. Not for this specific afternoon, not for this exact accusation, but for a moment like this, because I had known for 3 years that a moment like this was coming and I had decided, somewhere around year 5 of the wire transfers, that when it arrived I would be ready. I connected my phone to the portable projector I had asked my cousin Marco to set up earlier, under the pretense of showing vacation photos. Marco is 22 and easy to enlist and asked no questions. The screen behind me flickered on. 7 years of wire transfers organized by month formatted into a clean table by my colleague and closest friend Tomas Vega, who had spent 2 hours on a Tuesday evening helping me build it because he is that kind of friend and because he had been listening to this story for 4 years and felt it deserved a proper document. The room looked at the numbers. The numbers were specific. $2,500 per month, mortgage payments, January 2017 through present. $400 per month utilities same period. $38,000 one-time transfer, August 2019 notation. Javier tuition UT Austin fall semester. $100,000 one-time transfer March 2020 notation. Reyes construction operating capital, COVID impact. Smaller amounts scattered through the years. A car repair here, a medical bill there, a property tax shortfall in 2021 that my father had mentioned once in passing and I had quietly covered without telling him I'd done it. Total disbursed 7 years. $421,000. My mother's face went pale. And then the federal agent in the back row stood up. I need to go back before I go forward. That is the only way this makes sense. My parents came to San Antonio from Monterrey when I was 3 years old. My father, Eduardo Reyes, had a trade. Masonry, tile work, the specific skilled labor that built other people's houses. And within 5 years he had started a small contracting company. Reyes Construction never became large. It became at its best steady. My father employed 4 men, bid on residential projects, worked long hours and managed through genuine effort and my mother's ferocious budgeting, to buy a house in a decent school district before I started middle school. My mother, Carmen, did not work outside the home until I was 12, at which point she took a part-time job at a medical office that she held for 6 years before a back injury ended it. She ran the household with military precision and emotional complexity. She loved loudly and criticized at the same volume, and there was never any ambiguity about where you stood with her, which was both her gift and the thing about her that I found most exhausting. My brother Javier is 4 years younger than me. He is the easy one. That is not a cruel assessment, it is simply the organizing principle of our family. Javier is warm and funny and socially effortless and has always been, in the specific grammar of our household, the child my parents relaxed around. I was the child they managed. There is a difference. I understood it early and I made my peace with it, or I thought I did. What I did not fully understand until I was older was that being the child they managed meant being the child they trusted with the weight. Not financially, not at first, but emotionally. When my father's business was struggling, it was me he sat with at the kitchen table going over the numbers at 16, because I was the one who could read a spreadsheet and not panic. When my mother had a conflict with a neighbor or a relative or the school administration, it was me she rehearsed her arguments with, because I was the one who asked clarifying questions instead of just agreeing with her. I was useful in ways that Javier was not, and being useful is a complicated kind of love to grow up inside of. When I left for UT Austin on a partial scholarship at 18, my mother cried at the car for 20 minutes and then told me not to forget where I came from. I told her I wouldn't. I didn't fully understand yet what she meant by that, or how many forms the reminder would take over the following 15 years. I studied accounting because I was good at numbers and because I had watched my father's business struggle with financial mismanagement for years and I wanted to understand the machinery. In my junior year I discovered forensic accounting, the specific discipline of finding what has been hidden in financial records, the documentary archaeology of money, and something clicked into place that has not unclicked since. I am good at finding things. I am good at looking at a set of numbers and knowing where the story has been adjusted. I graduated, got certified, worked 3 years at a firm in Dallas, moved to Austin, built a client base in private compliance and financial forensics, and by 28 was running a boutique practice with 2 employees, a stable revenue base and a professional reputation that exceeded what most people my age had built. I also, at 26, discovered that my parents' mortgage was 60 days behind. My father had not told me. He had not told anyone. I found out because my mother, in a moment of stress, mentioned it while we were on the phone about something else, in the specific way people mention the most urgent thing as though it is incidental. Oh, and also the house situation, and then tried to move on. I asked her what the house situation was. She told me. I asked how much. She told me. I transferred the money that evening and set up a recurring transfer the following week without discussing it further. That was the beginning. I want to be honest about my motives because the story is less interesting if I am not. I did not set up those transfers purely out of love, though love was part of it. I did it partly because I could not bear the image of my parents losing the house I had grown up in, which is an emotional response with financial consequences, and I am accountable for that. I did it partly because my father's pride was such that an offered loan would have been refused and an obvious gift would have been complicated, and a quiet recurring transfer that he could tell himself was temporary was the only structure he would accept. I did it partly because I had inherited from my mother the belief that the family's stability was something I was responsible for, and I had not yet fully examined whether that belief was healthy or just familiar. And I did it partly, this is the part one I'm least comfortable with and therefore most committed to saying clearly, because there is a particular kind of power in being the invisible support. When you are the child who was managed, who was useful, who was trusted with weight but not celebrated, there is something seductive about becoming indispensable in a way no one can see. It is not a noble motivation. It is human. I had it and I acted on it, and I built 7 years of financial architecture on a foundation that included it. I say this because the story is not only about my family's failure to see me. It is also about my own choices, and I am not exempt from examination. The transfers continued through my late 20s. My client base grew. I hired a 3rd employee, a meticulous analyst named Valentina Cruz who had a gift for pattern recognition and an allergy to loose documentation. Tomas, my colleague and friend, ran the operational side of the practice while I handled client relationships and the actual forensic work. We had built something real and functional, and I was, by most measures, genuinely content in my professional life. My personal life was more complicated. I had ended a 4-year relationship at 30 when my partner, a landscape architect named David, told me that he felt like a secondary character in my life and that the primary character appeared to be my family's financial situation. This was not wrong. I was not ready to hear it at the time. I'm more ready now. I had good friendships. Tomas, Valentina, a small circle of women I had known since graduate school. I ran. I cooked badly and enthusiastically. I had a cat named Archivo. It means archive, which Tomas said was the most forensic accountant name possible for a pet, which I took as a compliment. I had a life outside the family situation. I want to be clear about that. The family situation was a weight I carried, not the whole of who I was. But the calls from my mother came every 2 weeks, and they had a structure I could set a clock by. 20 minutes of family news, 5 minutes of Javier updates presented as though they were the main event, and then the drift, almost imperceptible if you didn't know to look for it, toward whatever the current financial pressure was. A mention of the water heater. A note about the truck needing tires. The observation that things were tight this month, said with the specific neutrality of someone who is not asking but is definitely asking. I paid for the water heater. I covered the tires. I absorbed the tightness every month into the recurring transfer and occasionally supplemented it. My mother called me selfish at a Sunday dinner in 2021 because I had declined to fly home for my cousin's graduation. I had a client deadline. I explained this. She said family was more important than work and that I had forgotten where I came from. I did not mention the $240,000 I had transferred into their accounts by that point. I simply said I was sorry I couldn't make it and asked how my cousin was doing. Javier got married in 2022 to a woman named Sofia who is warm and practical and who I like genuinely. His wedding was beautiful and my parents were radiant at it. My mother told 3 separate relatives that Javier had become such a wonderful man because of the values they had instilled in him. She did not mention my contribution to the financial stability that had allowed those values to be instilled without the distraction of foreclosure. I smiled. I danced with my brother. I went back to Austin on Sunday and transferred the month's mortgage payment on Monday. By year 7, the total was $421,000. Tomas, who handled my books, had watched this number grow with increasing concern and decreasing silence. He had not told me to stop. But in early 2024 he had placed a document on my desk. A simple summary he had prepared, dated, organized, formatted, and said, "You should have this. Whatever you decide to do with it." I had kept it. I had updated it quarterly. I had told myself it was just good record keeping. I had known at some level that it was also preparation. What I had not known about was the identity theft. This is where the federal agent comes in. In January of 2024, a client of mine, I do compliance work, which means I occasionally have reason to run detailed financial background checks, used a service that my firm also had access to, and in the process of that work Valentina flagged something in our internal system. A credit inquiry on a social security number that matched mine attached to an account I did not recognize. Valentina brought it to me with the careful, unhurried delivery of someone who has found something serious and does not want to cause unnecessary alarm before the picture is complete. "It might be an error," she said. "But I want you to look at it." It was not an error. Over the following 6 weeks, Valentina and I traced 4 credit accounts and 2 personal loans, totaling $194,000. Opened in my name between 2018 and 2023. The addresses associated with the accounts were my parents' home address. 2 of the accounts showed my mother's phone number as the contact. One of the loans had been used to pay a balance at Reyes Construction, my father's company. I sat with this information for 10 days before I did anything with it. I want to be accurate about what those 10 days felt like. They did not feel like outrage, though outrage was present. They felt like a rearrangement. The specific cognitive experience of a previously held picture of the world being replaced by a more accurate one. I had believed my parents were people who struggled and accepted help they were too proud to ask for directly. I now had to add to that picture the possibility that they had also, at some point, decided that help I was not offering was help they would take anyway. I do not know whether my parents understood what they were doing legally. I have thought about this carefully and I genuinely do not know. My mother is not a financially sophisticated person. My father less so. The accounts were opened in ways that suggested someone had access to my information. Social security number, date of birth, answers to security questions, but not necessarily a clear understanding of what identity fraud meant under federal statute. Understanding something is morally wrong and understanding it is federally prosecutable are not the same knowledge, and I cannot say with certainty which one my parents had. What I can say is that it happened, and that it had damaged my credit in ways I was still in the process of fully mapping, and that by the time of the family reunion I had already filed a report with the FTC and been contacted by an investigator from the Financial Crimes Unit of the FBI field office in San Antonio. His name was Agent Morales. He was soft-spoken and thorough and had contacted me 3 weeks before the reunion to discuss the case. I had asked him carefully whether it was possible for him to be present at a family gathering where I intended to confront my parents with documentation, in case the conversation required. And here I had chosen my words with some care, official context. He had agreed to be there. He had agreed also to let me begin. The room was looking at the projection screen. I gave them 30 seconds with it. Long enough to see the numbers. Long enough for the shape of 7 years to become visible. This is a record of every transfer I've made to my parents' account since January 2017, I said. Kept my voice level. I had practiced this in my car that morning, which sounds clinical and maybe is, but I am a person who prepares and preparation had served me well. Mortgage. Utilities. Javier's tuition. The business bailout in 2020. Miscellaneous. Total, $421,000. The silence was complete. 61 people and not one sound except the faint hum of a generator somewhere past the fence line. My mother's face had gone from pale to something more complex. A layering of shame and confusion and the beginning of a defensive rearrangement that I recognized because I had watched it operate my whole life. Mija, she started. I'm not finished, I said. Not unkindly. But clearly. I advanced the slide. The next screen showed the credit accounts. In the course of my regular work, my firm identified 4 credit accounts and 2 personal loans opened in my name between 2018 and 2023. Total borrowed, $194,000. These accounts were opened at my parents' address, using my social security number and personal information, without my knowledge or consent. Aunt Donna's smirk was gone. Uncle Ray had stopped nodding. My brother Javier was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. A kind of horrified stillness as though he was watching something that could not be unwatched and knew it. My father had not moved. His gaze, which had been on his plate, was now on me. His face was doing something I also did not have a ready category for. Grief maybe. The particular grief of someone watching a consequence arrive that they had known somewhere was always coming. I am not here to prosecute my parents, I said. I am here because I was told at a family reunion in front of 60 people, that I think only of myself. I wanted the record to reflect what actually happened. Agent Morales stood up. He was in the back row and he stood quietly and he did not approach and he did not speak yet. He simply stood. But a federal agent standing up in a room has a specific gravitational effect that does not require words. Several relatives near him shifted in their chairs. Someone at the far table said something in Spanish that I didn't catch. My Aunt Gloria, who is my father's sister and one of the few people in this family I trust completely, put her hand over her mouth. This is Special Agent Morales from the FBI's San Antonio Financial Crimes Unit, I said. He is here in connection with the identity fraud case. He is not here to make arrests today. He is here because this is an active investigation and because I asked him to be present. My mother sat down. This happened slowly, the way a person sits when their legs have stopped cooperating. A gradual, involuntary descent. My father said, Isabel. Just my name. Just those 3 syllables in his voice, with everything he didn't have words for compressed inside them. I looked at him. I know, Dad. This was the truest thing I said all day. I knew. I had known for weeks, had sat with the knowledge in my Austin apartment at midnight with Archivo on my lap and the documents on the table and the full understanding that the 2 things, my support and their fraud, had existed simultaneously, that my parents were people who had accepted a daughter's help and also at some point, decided to take more than was offered, and that these 2 facts did not cancel each other out and could not be neatly separated into a story where one person was simply the victim and one was simply the villain. Families are not organized that way. I wish they were. It would be much easier to tell this story. I will tell you what happened in the immediate hours after, though the telling is less clean than the build-up. Agent Morales spoke briefly with my parents. Not an interrogation that had already occurred separately at their home 2 weeks prior. This was more of a formal acknowledgement. The investigation was ongoing, counsel was advised, cooperation had been noted. My parents had already retained an attorney. This was not the first time they had heard these words. But it was the first time they had heard them in front of their family. My Aunt Gloria came to find me while my parents were speaking with Agent Morales. She put her hand on my arm and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "How long have you known about the accounts?" 6 weeks, I said. "And the transfers? How long have you been doing that?" 7 years. She looked at me with the specific expression of someone recalibrating a long-held understanding of a person. "I always thought you were the cold one," she said. "The one who moved away and got busy." "I know," I said. "I was wrong." "You had the information you had," I said. "You weren't wrong with that information." She squeezed my arm. She went back to her table. I stood at the edge of the gathering and watched my family process what had just happened, and I thought about the 7-year architecture of my own silence and what it had cost me alongside what it had funded. I had paid for my parents' stability. I had also, in the process, paid for their ability to tell a story about me that was not true. Every month that I transferred money anonymously was a month they could continue to believe, could continue to tell others, that I was the distant one, the selfish one, the child who had moved away and forgotten where she came from. I had built the very platform from which my mother had delivered tonight's accusation. I am accountable for that. Not for the accusation, that belongs to her. But for the conditions that allowed it to continue unchallenged for 7 years. Tomas texted me at 8:47 p.m. "How did it go?" I typed back, "Exactly as prepared and nothing like I expected." He replied, "That's usually what the real ones feel like." My parents called me on the drive back to my hotel. I pulled over to take the call. My mother spoke first. Her voice was different. Not the managed disappointment voice, not the performance of sacrifice voice, but something rawer and less constructed. "I don't know how to explain it," she said. "We kept telling ourselves it was temporary. That we would pay it back when the business picked up." "I know," I said. "We didn't think," she stopped. "I know," I said again. And I did. Not as forgiveness. Forgiveness is a longer process than one phone call on the side of a Texas highway, but as understanding. My parents were not sophisticated criminals. They were people who had convinced themselves that borrowing from their daughter's credit was borrowing from family, that it was different, that the rules that applied to strangers did not quite apply to the people you had raised. They were wrong. They were also, I was slowly accepting, people I recognized, people whose capacity for self-justification was not foreign to me, who had built a story about their situation that allowed them to keep functioning the way people do. It did not make it acceptable. It made it human. Those are different things, and I was learning to hold both. My father got on the phone. He said, "I'm sorry, Mija." I said, "I know, Dad." A long pause. "Are you going to?" He couldn't finish it. "I don't know yet," I said. Which was true. I didn't know what I was going to do about the investigation, about the transfers, about the shape of the relationship going forward. I was not going to decide any of it on the side of a highway at 9 p.m. "I need some time." He said he understood. I believed him. Whether understanding was the same as anything changing, that was a different question, one I was not positioned to answer yet. I drove the rest of the way to the hotel with the window down and the warm San Antonio night coming in, and I thought about Javier, who had texted me at 9:15. "Can we talk?" I didn't know any of it. "I need you to know that." I believed him too. Javier was not a strategic person. He did not have the architecture for concealment. He was simply a man who had grown up in the favorable position of his family's attention and had never looked closely enough at the machinery behind it to ask what was keeping it running. That is a failure, but a different kind than his parents. I texted him back. "Yes. This week." I put the phone down. I checked into the hotel. I ordered room service that I barely touched. I sat on the bed with Tomas's document, the one he'd given me 18 months ago, and I looked at the numbers one more time and then I put it away. 3 weeks after the reunion, I met with a family attorney and my own legal counsel to discuss the investigation. The resolution took 4 months and is not mine to detail fully here, because it involved other people's legal circumstances and I have no interest in narrating consequences as entertainment. What I will say is that my parents cooperated fully, that the financial harm to my credit was documented and addressed, and that the outcome was one that reflected the complexity of the situation rather than its simplest version. My mother and I did not speak for 6 weeks after the reunion. This was not a formal decision. It was simply what happened when two people have said something true and are waiting for the air to clear enough to find out what is left. When we did speak, the conversation was shorter and different than any we had had before. My mother said, "I taught you to take care of this family. I think I taught you too well and not well enough at the same time." This was the most honest thing she had said to me in years and I held it carefully. "I let you believe something that wasn't true," I said. "For a long time. I thought I was protecting everyone. I think I was also protecting myself from having to have this conversation." My mother was quiet. "Then, what do we do now?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I think we start by telling the truth about what things cost." This felt to both of us like something. Not resolution. Not reconciliation yet. Something earlier than those. The specific fragile moment before a new structure begins, when the old one has been cleared away and the ground is visible but nothing has been built on it yet. I transferred the November mortgage payment. Not because nothing had changed. Everything had changed. But because the house was still the house and my parents were still my parents, and I was still the person who had been trusted with weight since I was 16 years old, and I was still working out which parts of that I wanted to carry differently and which parts were simply, irreducibly, mine. Javier came to Austin in December. We spent a Saturday walking around Barton Springs and talking for the first time in years with the specific honesty of two people who have had something large and previously unspoken become large and spoken. He said, "I didn't see what was happening." I said, "I know. I made it easy not to see." He said, "That doesn't make it okay." I said, "No. It doesn't." We had dinner. He met Archivo, who ignored him comprehensively. He laughed more than I expected. We talked about Sophia, who was pregnant. I was going to be an aunt in March, which was a thing I had not entirely processed yet and which made me feel simultaneously the full weight of what was broken and the full possibility of what could still be built. He hugged me at the door when he left. I let him. We are not fixed. But we are facing the same direction for the first time in a long time, and that is somewhere to start. I run 3 mornings a week along the trail by Town Lake. In the early mornings before the city is fully awake, there is a quality of light on the water that I have never found a word for. Not quite gold, not quite gray, something in between that suggests the day is still deciding what it wants to be. I think about the $421,000 sometimes on those runs. Not with regret exactly. The money is gone and it is not coming back, and I made the choices I made with full agency, and the life that was funded with it. My parents' house, my brother's degree, my father's company. Those things are real and they are not nothing. I think about the $194,000 that was taken without asking. I think about the difference between those two numbers and what lives in the space between them. I think about my mother's face when the projector came on. Not the pale shock of someone caught, but the earlier moment, half a second before that, when she saw the total and something in her face did the same kind of rearrangement I had done alone in my apartment 6 weeks prior. The specific look of someone encountering an accurate account of something they had only ever held in distorted form. I think that there is something she understood in that moment that she had not understood before. I do not know what she will do with it. I do not know what any of us will do with the more accurate picture we are all now holding. What I know is that I am no longer funding a story that isn't true. What I know is that the silence is over, and silence, once broken, does not reassemble the same way. What I know is that I am 33 years old and I am learning slowly the difference between carrying weight and choosing it. That morning after Javier left, I sat at my desk for a long time. Archivo climbed onto the files and made himself comfortable as he does, with the complete indifference of a creature who has never once considered whether he is worth the space he takes up. I thought, that is not a bad way to be. I opened my laptop. I went back to work. Some things were over. Some things were beginning. Most things were in the long, unresolved middle, which is where most true things live. I was still here. I was still building. And for the first time in 7 years, everyone knew it.